Hello, my name is Kelsey Pierce, and I am an event specialist here at Origo Software Technologies. I want to thank everyone for joining us for Origo's webinar series. We've been hosting these industry webinars for about 3 years now, and we want to thank everyone for your continued support. In today's discussion, our panelists will share insights on how you can empower your workforce through fostering collaboration and productivity in construction teams. And joining me today is our VP of Marketing, Richard Kramer, who will be moderating today's session. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kelsey. Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes. The webinar is recorded, and we will provide all registered participants with the recording as well as the slides. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them via the Q&A chat box, and we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't answer your question during the available time, we will follow up with an email. Now, before we introduce our panelists, we want to acknowledge that one of them was unable to join us today due to an emergency. However, we are thrilled to present today's esteemed panelists as we look forward to our engaging discussion. First up, we have Michael Koslow, a senior engineering project manager at the City of Boulder with expertise in highway engineering, bike pedestrian facilities, and site development. He specializes in road design, drainage, permitting, and NEPA documentation with expertise across multiple states. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Our next speaker, Sayeh Amirshaghaghi, is a seasoned expert in water and infrastructure with an extensive experience managing large-scale water management and infrastructure projects. She specializes in delivering sustainable, innovative solutions to ensure long-term reliability and quality of water systems. As the Chief Water Engineer at the Department of Water Management, Sayeh oversees strategic planning and enhances operational efficiency that drives the implementation of forward-thinking water management practices. Sayeh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and before we get started with today's discussion, we are going to hop into a poll that just kind of lets us know who's in our audience. So if you could just take a few minutes to collect which job role best describes your position. Got project manager, capital planning and finance, engineer, consultant, administration, or other. Give that a few moments.
Yeah, see the responses are starting to come in. Thanks, folks. If you're unsure, just pick the best one that you think is most closely aligned. All right, see if we can move on. Can I show the results so far? Thanks, folks.
All right. So it looks like we have a majority of project managers, engineers, and administrators with a few capital planning and finance individuals. All right.
Yeah,
well, with that, I will hand it over to Richard, and we can begin our webinar.
Yeah, interesting. So about 1/5 are in other. I'm curious how those folks would describe themselves. But anyway, thanks again, Kelsey, and a very warm welcome from me to everybody here today. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us. You know, collaboration and communication within capital projects, even across the whole capital program, it's kind of like an evergreen topic, I find, that comes up a lot when we speak to our customers. From my perspective, I think there's a couple of things happening. I think one is just the fact that they are projects, and projects by their nature mean that you're on a deadline to deliver something. You have a set of resources, and every project tends to be a little unique. And so that makes it challenging. Even if it's a type of project that you've done multiple times, there's just circumstances around each one that makes it a little bit different. And then for us in the capital program space, you know, it's about scale. I think projects are, you know, if you've got a $100,000 project that's going to take 2 weeks, that's great. But a lot of the time projects are like millions of dollars. They take multiple years to deliver. And so they're just complex and they involve a lot of different stakeholders. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at collaboration and communication across the life cycle, including working with internal parties and external parties, and then talk about communication before, during, and after the construction phase. So let's get started. Just switch the slide here. Great. And let's just talk about maybe some of the big picture challenges to start off with, right? So we often see stats like the one you have up there on your screen. This is from Matterport, who are a spatial mapping company. And they did a survey surveying construction execs and project managers who said that basically 86% of the respondents had experience with poor communication on projects leading to issues. So I'd like to start with Sayeh. Sayeh, when you just think about your experience over your career, how do you look at this issue of collaboration and communication on projects?
Yeah, sure. So just before I started, I want to just emphasize on here with the Department of Water Management at the City of Chicago, we are partnering lots of the capital improvement projects. We are having lots of construction activities going throughout the year. And if you cannot go through the proper channel of the communications, basically, if you live in a different silos, office and the construction side, you're going to get into the trouble. So too often we are just experiencing on some of our the projects here and there, and when we get into those details, nitty gritty of what is the reason of that, sometimes it's just the collaboration issues. So we're just trying to tackle these collaboration issues by adopting based off our lately there are so many technologies out there, different softwares, different the cloud-based tools that could provide the real-time updates to the end users. So we're just using some centralized dashboard data. So to just tackle our schedules, our budgets, and the progress in the work. So in that case, we're just having a good collaboration between our office team that's located in the office and the construction folks and the resident engineers, our CMs in the trailers in the office. So that will help to just fulfill those the gaps between job sites and the office. So I think that's a very good point that we are adapting it lately, and we see those progresses within our the construction projects.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's you can just say collaboration and communication. There's all different kinds of those things that happen at different phases of the project, and they probably have different sort of challenges. Thanks, Sayeh. So, Michael, what about you? Tell us a little bit about City of Boulder and what you've seen in your career around this topic.
Certainly, yeah, and I can thank you. I can certainly offer more kind of staff perspective. I'm a capital project manager there at Boulder, and here I think that we rely on the team of people for the collaboration. There is a lot of multimodal projects involve significant public engagement because a lot of times there's a trade-off. There's a travel lane, there's a parking lane, there's something that somebody didn't used to have that has to deal with now. So we end up having a team of planners, operational engineers, and capital like myself that are kind of managing the construction projects. Similar to Sayeh, I would say our software is a lot of our common point, right? Like we have our scheduling software and kind of all our budgeting software, which is always changing. And then one of the things that I would want to share for a staff, any project manager, is have a design decision log. I love that because then once you've made a decision, we're going to go with this speed, we're going to go with this turn. We don't need to revisit it. And I think that that's one of the tools that I would want to promote for projects.
Right. I like that. So you're saying, document your decisions so that once they're done, you can move on. And
we've got a multi-year design. Sometimes there's a right-of-way acquisition, different things that get forgotten and lost in the process. So, and even to the point where you're handing this to someone else at construction, like, hey, remember we made this commitment that we would, only close the driveway so often, or like half of it at a time, or something like that. So. That's where the communication gets really breached, is if there's like months long or more than a year long gap in the process. So we try to try to keep hold of things through those processes and that kind of software.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, thanks, folks. Let's move on and dive into maybe something a little more specific here when we talk about working with your internal teams. Obviously, we're talking about different departments within your organization, and I think this can be particularly challenging at larger organizations, but I've seen even smaller agencies that struggle with things like data silos or miscommunications just between the different departments. You have new people joining, people leaving with sort of institutional knowledge and so on. So Michael, I'll start with you this time. So, where have you seen some of these issues arise when it comes to internal communication?
I'd like to list an example on a project where our group capital project works within what's it called? We're acquiring right of way, right? We'll have an acquisition specialist, and in this case, we needed to build the driveway. So it was a temporary easement. Well, that temporary easement was from an apartment complex. The apartment complex changed property managers, so our finance department had a property manager on file. Even though we had been working with the new one, the old one ended up getting a $30,000 check, and we had to work with them, and they were very nice and all. But to me, that's one where check your vendors, check all of your vendors. That's the one lesson I would share. Make sure that everything, because names change, companies change, addresses change. So I'd say that was probably the biggest one that within our team. I wish we had been able to tackle. But the rest of the project's going good.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned right away. I mean, we have a right of way solution that we offer at Origo, and it actually came from, in a way, from dealing with our project management and construction stuff came first, and then we heard from these construction teams that was a pain point for other parts of the organization, and so it came to them because of that interface between right of way. And so what I've learned is that right of way on its own is so complicated that it's a whole thing on its own, and it kind of sits. Even after being in the space for 15, 20 years, I'm not sure where to put right away on the org chart kind of thing. Sometimes it's involved in so many things that run sort of parallel to the rest of the process. So very, very interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that. Sayeh, what about you? Internal communication between departments, where have you seen issues come up?
Yeah, I believe that's a very good question. And some of these hurdles or just the issues that we do have currently with our projects are because of these misaligned objectives between these departments. We can't just have everybody wants to start the construction project. We're going to have the pre-kickoff meeting, the kickoff meeting. That you need to take this very seriously. That is my goal always. I'm just saying, we are not just having this meeting just for the sake of those meetings, to sit down and just go. We have to see what are the expectations and goals are. You have to just go under the details of these projects, even from the large scale projects, small scale projects that goes within the $1 million projects, or you have $100 million project. It doesn't matter, but you have to just tackle every single aspects of the details of what you're expecting to object within this project. What is your goals? What's your expectations? Talk with the shareholders, talk with the internal departments, who's going to be involved in what. Take a step back before you get started this project. When it gets started, the ball is start rolling. You cannot stop it. You're going to face with so many claims. You're going to face with so many interruptions down the road. You don't want to get into the hurdles. So the pre-collaboration or coordination between departments or the stakeholders or the municipalities, whoever just got engaged in that project, is a very important key, I believe. And nowadays, finding the good skilled laborers or good skilled professionals are a very challenging subject. So for obtaining those and keeping those to run basically these coordination and collaboration is very hard. So bringing those on board, you can give them some incentives, or you can have a training programs for them. Hey, this is our project, this is our expectation, and walk them through to basically educate them, invest on your the manpower. So in that case, down the road, you're going to gain more benefits from that. So these are the points that I think is very important before we in collaboration between the departments and the stakeholders to have a successful delivery projects.
Yeah, you're definitely speaking my language there. So I come from a background, I did a lot of sort of just consulting and whatnot earlier in my career. And so I'm very much a process kind of guy, like process. What's the process? And so having a consistent way of having the steps in order and going through them kind of regardless of the size of the project, like you said, is I think the right thing. And you also mentioned the staffing thing. That's interesting as well. That seems to be one of the hottest topics just in our space right now. I was so one of the groups we work with is a group called the Construction Industry Institute, which is out of the University of Texas in Austin, which is where we're headquartered. And I was at a conference of theirs just a few weeks ago, and they had a whole list of topics about what they wanted. They're a research group, like a think tank. And so they were like, what are we going to research in 2025? And that issue of staffing was the #1 issue that came up at that conference. So it's like, that's interesting though, like figuring out what does that mean for your collaboration as you're bringing new people in, onboarding them. What is our process again? I think that's a very interesting point. Yeah, great. So let's switch gears. Oh, before we switch gears to the next topic, we had another poll question for our audience. So Kelsey, why don't you go ahead with this?
Yeah. So if everyone could take a moment and just kind of let us know where you experience the most communication breakdowns within your team. Is it the construction and design, engineering and finance, right-of-way and other departments, office and field teams, project managers and engineers, or other? Just so we can see where we're seeing those breakdowns the most.
And again, I think there is overlap in here. There's a lot of overlap in what we do in general. So just pick one that resonates most with you. We've got about 25 folks answering. We'll give it a few more seconds. I'm kind of curious about this one. See if it's spread out or if there's one that sort of takes the lead. All right, looks like we got about half our folks. So give it a few more seconds. Great, I think that's almost everybody.
All right.
All right,
so yeah,
results.
like construction and design, 30%, and then engineering and finance, right-of-way, field. So a little spread out.
Yeah, so that is interesting that it's spread out. I mean, obviously, like project managers and engineers, might be similar to construction and design. There might be some overlap there. But yeah, no clear winner. So there is, but no one's running away with it. Right away came up again. All right, that is interesting. Thanks, folks. We appreciate that. So challenges all over, in other words. So let's move on. So we spoke about the internal teams. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about communication and collaboration, outside the walls of your agency. Obviously, we rely heavily on our design and other pre-construction consultants, our contractors. And then in the public space, we have this additional wrinkle, if you like, of sometimes having to work with sister agencies. So there may be more than one agency involved on a project. And then the public themselves are a stakeholder. So Sayeh, how do you think, or what do you think agencies should be focused on when it comes to collaborating with these external folks?
This is the very interesting and I would say really challenging subject in the construction, specifically when it comes to the public entities and all those like coordination that needs to happen for the public infrastructures that needs to be built. So many stakeholders get involved. So, and you have to have a very precise coordination task to engage all these stakeholders early in the process, that I would just always say is that make a world of a difference. I have a lots of, so like, for example, you can just have like a town hall meetings, you can have a workshops, get together, like get the feedbacks. I have a project we have like recently, currently basically working on that. That was a huge project between a couple of municipalities. It needs a lots of coordination between different sister agencies, between different public and the private like organization, the outreach to them. And just like there was a resistance in the public when we just like, when there you go just blind, when you just notify them and say, hey, this is what it is, we have a regularly, weekly, bi-weekly with all like pertinent groups, so people have the chance to sit on them, educate them, and definitely it's just reduced the public resistance and saved a cost simply because the community feel that they were included in those part of the discussion, so they feel confident about that, that their voice has been heard. And we just like, we inform them on the step by step, this is what we're planning to do, this is what is our targeted goal, and this is what your community will gonna gain by this project. So these are like so you're gonna reduce the risk of those challenges down the road. So for these external collaboration, I would say like, uh, there you have not to forget that the community specifically on these is a very, having that collaboration is a very challenging thing. You have to make sure that in the construction projects that it impacts a lots of like the construction activities, new projects that going on within the communities. There is a traffic, there is a noise, there is environmental concerns, there's so many things that needs to be addressed properly. We can use like the sustainable material, or like we can have like a clear communication channels on the timelines. We can bring like we have a meetings like a couple weeks ago with one of our like the high schools principals to get them involved even, and bring the communities, the aldermanics, like the attention to that projects. Here we're going to be out there, we bring different municipalities. So we are just taking all these precautions to make sure that at the end of the goal, when you just like break the ground, you're not going to say, somebody comes and say, oh, we don't know about this, and then you're going to get to deeper problems down the road. So we're reducing those risks of the construction and just make it more like I would say, beneficial for all parties. Definitely for our end, as we are just doing the construction, but for the other entities, as we are acknowledging their understanding and training them properly. So.
Yeah, thanks. And that's another good point. Is just, I think we all understand, the earlier you catch an issue in a project, the cheaper it is to fix. And yet, I think we make mistakes, and we tend to realize too late that somebody wasn't involved in the discussion, and now we have to, pull the train tracks back that once they've been laid, metaphorically speaking, and yeah, that makes it really tough. Michael, what about you? What have you learned just dealing with contractors, consultants, the public, and everybody outside the walls of the organization?
So I'd walk through pretty quickly a couple like the life cycle of the project, and when we're adding in a raised bike facility and changing the curb line, but we're not impacting travel lanes in this project. This begat from a study that was federally financed in 2017, and the design started in 2021. I think that notifying property owners, having coordination through our city's Transportation Advisory Board was key, as they helped shape the project. The property owners needed to be worked, negotiated. They had the rights to have their own appraisal, et cetera, through the Uniform Relocation Act, which is a very prescribed set of touch points and negotiations with property owners. When we got to construction, there would be a city posting, any lane closures are going to be on a city website. They make it to Google, other things to say, hey, look out, transit stops, make it to similarly Google Transit. When we get done, we have to do a very elaborate post-construction no rise certification. So a survey to prove we graded the project how we said we were going to do it. to making sure there aren't any flooding. So there's a whole slew of collaboration needed on multiple fronts. And I should have led with this. The project has 10 funding sources. So that means that we had a lot of different participation, a lot of conversations to get to those agreements. So that's kind of one example of a project and how it's going.
Yeah, very good. So I used to manage. I started my career managing IT projects as kind of a junior project manager. And one of my mentors, I came to him one day and was like, "There's an issue on the project. Should I send an email? I'm not really sure how to say it." And his advice was, in project management, you cannot over communicate. That was his position. Like, always communicate more than you think you need to, and it's, you know, and that's the better the better default option to take a little bit, which always just stuck in my head. So yeah, I think that there's multiple ways that agencies have to engage the public and engage other stakeholders. And then again, you kind of say what we were saying before, which is, you know, process. Have that, you know, define what your best practices are, and then make sure you're holding yourselves accountable to follow through on that. Yeah, great. Thanks, folks. This is our last quick poll for the webinar before we move on to our last two topics. So Kelsey, tell us about this one.
Yeah, so we're really interested to know, with external stakeholders, where do you experience the most communication breakdown? Is it typically with your contractors, your design consultants, executive boards, or the public? And if something doesn't fall within that category, then feel free to click the others option.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we should have had an all of the above option. I don't know. But yeah, if you had to pick one, where do you think you or your organization has the most challenge in communicating? Let me see those answers coming in. Let's give it a few more seconds. As we're waiting, folks, by the way, I am seeing a few questions come in for Michael and Sayeh in our chat. Thank you for those questions. Please keep the questions coming in, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. All right, let's take a look at the results.
So again, kind of everywhere, but definitely leaning towards the contractors and the public being where you experience the most communication breakdown. And then with design consultants right behind it, and then executives and board. Yeah.
And depending on the setup of your board or the executives, that could also be internal, I guess. Just depends how your board is set up. But that is interesting. Sort of similar to the last answer, spread out with the construction piece sort of in a bit of a lead. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Let's move on and talk about that sort of specific handle from design to construction, right? So this is obviously a major gate for any infrastructure, any facility project. There's a lot of activities that happen prior to the shovels hitting the ground, as you said, Sayeh. And so even before design, you might be doing feasibility studies and environmental studies. You have the whole procurement process, which we haven't really touched on yet, which obviously that depends on the delivery method that you're using, whether you're using design build, but just dealing with procurement and all of that can be an issue. So Michael, we'll start with you. What have you seen best practice-wise when it comes to all the collaboration that happens pre-construction, getting everything ready for that construction phase?
So thanks, Richard. I do think that's the one nice thing about engineering. If you're doing your homework, you don't have to worry about the final exam, right? So the way to get there is, and there's a lot of things, but the one thing I would share with our financing, it's almost always, we don't have enough money to build what we want to build. So we have to shave some things off, value engineer, that kind of thing. So we have prescribed, what is it called? overages. I'm going to call it a little bit extra. So at 30%, we've got 30% built in. At 90%, we've got 10% built in, and at 100%, we get to zero in hopes that, you know, we're getting to that right bid. I also would share that our DOT funding partners will require us to meet 3 different clearances: utility, right-of-way, and environmental. So, you know, a lot of that is just buttoning up all those forms, making sure we have. I've had those conversations, and with utilities, it's ensuring we know who's doing what, with the highway contractors doing what, the utility contractors doing the other thing, when are they doing it, that the kind of thing is important. We're fortunate, City of Boulder, that our transportation master plan gets vetted through City Council. So when we get to the advertisement, we don't have to re-ask the City Council to approve it.
Yeah.
The construction contract, a lot of agencies have that as a hurdle. So I would mention that comes up on some projects. I think it's important that if you're doing the handoff, kind of like I alluded to before, hey, were there commitments made during the planning? Were there commitments made during design that need to make sure that they, you know, get translated? And a lot of times it's funding partners and the grant requirements associated with them.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and yeah. Again, it's just a lot of moving pieces you have to keep track of. Sayeh, same question to you. How do you think about just the whole everything that happens before construction, wrapping it up, and then moving it over? What have you seen or heard around that topic?
Yeah, definitely. That's when we get into that discussion of the hurdles before the pre-construction. There, I also want to elaborate more in details. There was lots of discussions needs to happen before that, and there was lots of hurdles before that. As what you and like the Mike said earlier, there was like some of those like the procurement stuff, budgeting issues. So we're just dealing with, you need to have all your like the subject straightened out before even we get to that pre-construction, and how you can manage that. So after you get to that like the design, if you're saying like 100% design is completed, even before your 100% design completed, within your milestone of design, you have to start just thinking about how you're going to obtain your permit, who's going to be responsible for what permits needs to be done to be obtained, which entities are responsible to obtaining this permit. We are just having the designer as the standpoint of like, hey, start those like obtaining those. You don't need necessarily to obtain them, but at least initiate them. Make sure that, hey, give the heads up to the contractor on board that you do need A, B, and C permits on board. Then the second thing is like, as what you all mentioned about, is how you're going to secure the funding for that project. There are multiple like resources, and your project has some specific goals and intentions. So how you're going to secure the funding is all tied back to your design. So how you're going to design that, what's the end goal of your project will going to look like. So that's going to dictate how you want to secure the funding for it. And that's going to be another like the problematic issues before you get into the construction. Besides of that, there are so many regulatory requirements. You have to be compatible with all those regulatory requirements. So it is like you are on a treadmill. I always said that. You keep just working. After 6 months, there is another change coming in with the new codes. So you have to make sure that it's just adopted based on your design guidelines and everything. So based on your books, the spec books, and that goes to the procurement for the bidding and advertisement. That's the other issue with the procurement of those like contracts. How do you want to procure it? Who's going to bid on that? Are you going to go with the low bidder? What is the policy for that? So these are like the big questions or the big portfolios that you need to just capture all those before you get into that construction stage. This is like the challenges. The other thing I want to mention is about the data. Data is playing a significant role. You obtain those data. Different groups are responsible for different entities. Okay, so each group having their own job, but at the end of the road, you want all these data to be captured in one platform. So whoever just managing that project as like the PM or like the chief of that project have the overseas of those. So having like a one unified or centralized platform to capture all those like the details of these stages is a very key, I believe, key point to your construction before you start that. So I would say like having that permitting delays play a significant role, having the regulatory updates, the bidding packages, your budgeting. So these are like the different thing, and data gathering. These are all, I believe, that's what we are aiming to implement it in our system as like the PMIS system or project integrated management system that captured all these like the small portfolios in a bigger, large scope. So whoever just oversees that, make sure he has a good control of everything in board. So those are the key, some of those key elements that make causes the hurdles in the pre-construction activities.
Yeah, and that it reminds me of another story. I once was chatting to a customer who is a project engineer slash project manager, kind of worked on some of the design side and then actually getting the construction done, and for a public works agency. And he said something to the effect of, I wish we could learn to manage projects outside of construction. And what he meant was that there's obviously a whole discipline to managing projects that in a way like require those same project management fundamentals. Like, what are the dependencies? I mean, you spoke about the thing that's tricky is that you have these overlapping dependencies, right? So like you said, it's not as simple as A finishes, B starts. They're overlapping. You can start the one earlier. And so that was his comment, that we're really good at once we're in the field building it, but we could do better outside of that.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, and folks, keep those questions coming if you have questions for the panel. Lastly, I think we can really talk about collaboration and communication without thinking about what happens after the project closes or while you're closing it out, right? And the type of stuff we typically build, these capital assets, bridges, roads, airports, facilities, they have a lifespan that's typically, stretches decades. It's usually an asset that's, 30 years plus, it's going to be around for that long. So, everything you do up until the end of construction typically needs to be kept to some degree for posterity. And we see that stat from KPMG there that says a lot of that data is already lost. So, Sayeh, we'll start with you. When you think in terms of collaboration and communication, when it comes to wrapping up the project, or even after the project is done, and you're in that maintenance phase, what are the key things agencies should be thinking about?
Yeah, all of these are very good. Like all the subjects that we discussed about it earlier are like very good. If you can implement it correctly, we can just avoid all those headaches down the road when we get into the closeout session. When you just like incomplete documentation can lead to fines, can lead to claims, lead to just the maintenance issues down the road. So you have to just make sure that all like the issues that currently we're just doing, the project has been finished 3 years ago, but we're still like working on the claims. So this is like miscoordination, miscommunications that hasn't happened in the proper channels through the different milestones of the projects. When it gets to the closeout section, incomplete documentation of all of this just play an important role of getting us to these claims, fines, maintenance headaches. So with having like the as-built, proper as-builts or the proper like the warranties that are critical for the projects, make sure that these are compliance for the future maintenance of the end users, which are our operations, probably for the facilities. It's just like that. So you want to make sure that these have been implemented in your packages for the construction. The other thing I want to just talk about that is about the AI. AI is currently, everybody's talking about the AI, but how this AI will going to be implemented in the construction activity, how you're going to use that, and how you're going to benefit from that. I think this is very important topic. Everybody talking about it, but how we can leverage the AI into our system. That is what we were trying to just put some investment strategy and study on it to find the appropriate channel to address our deficiencies in the construction projects. And here is what's happening. I believe with gathering all those proper documentations throughout different channels and bring it to the AI, so you have a backup history of what exactly was the hurdles throughout like your project, your construction activities or projects, throughout the different milestones. So you have a great database. You can leverage this in AI to analyze your past project data and give you like the insights to optimize your costs, you reduce your risk, improve your schedules, for your future projects. I think this is very critical because the lesson learned from your previous projects will gonna play important role for your future projects. So this is what I definitely it's going to help your budget overburdens that you're facing for each single project. So streamlining the closeout process is, I believe, it's another like the subject that you make sure that you have the proper channels to streamline this closeout project, like the standards checklist or digital tools that you may want to just implement it as a punch list item to deliver those projects, to make sure that once you send it to the procurement for the compliance review and all those things before you close out, you just address all those tackles in advance.
Mhm. Yeah, again, it's about the data and how you handle the data, and is the data complete, and those kind of things. And it's interesting that you mentioned, it's interesting you mentioned AI. That's been a massive topic for us with our customers in the last 12, 18 months. So we're actually working on AI solutions to do pretty much what you're talking about, being able to search through your current data and your historical data in sort of a natural way with like a co-pilot or a chat that can bring up, go look through your data and bring that up. That's something we're launching early in 2025. I think I can say that.
Oh, that's a great news.
Something we're working on right now, with some of our larger customers and going through, sort of test phase and that kind of thing. They're very exciting stuff. Another way that technology can just cut down the time it takes to find information.
Perfect.
Yeah, Michael, I guess last word to you. What do you think about when it comes to closing it out and then retaining that data down the road in case you need to go back to it at some point?
Yeah, a couple thoughts here, but something that Sayeh said kind of triggered me to say and suggest, and this may be an AI solution y'all are already working on, but the example that I saw of AI in construction that I thought was really handy was if you had a traffic signal cabinet and that cabinet had really specific assignments, that you had a digital picture of that, and that the person that came out, they're wearing glasses and they're like, oh, this is where it was when it was set up.
Mm-hmm.
That I think would be a really powerful future use of AI. And it can be any sort of technical thing where you've got a display and somebody's going, what did it look like? Like in terms of the closeout, I wanted to share that one of the biggest challenges that we've got going on with the existing project was a double box culvert built 7 inches taller than it was shown in the plan. So all of our plans showed that there was not an as-built on the previous project that reflected the real elevation. And so now we've got $300,000 to $400,000 worth of complete road reconstruction that we did not anticipate in order to reconstruct this box culvert that is too tall to put our bike lanes over. So I cannot definitely emphasize enough, be checking your as-builts when you're in that design. That's where I wish I had done that. But when you're done, making sure that any drainage appurtenances are put into GIS. If there's any maintenance agreements, if you have a partner maintenance agreement with someone else, make sure that that's documented, and probably a financial, like at the end of the year, you've got your closeout on the contracts. I'd say those are kind of the main points.
Yeah, and I'm glad both of you have kind of mentioned the data and the technology side a couple of times. I am still surprised after being in the industry for quite a while that like the paper thing still throws me off. But sometimes I'll talk to a customer and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's in the filing cabinet," and I'm like, literally in the filing cabinet, in the filing room. There's a whole room of paper there that you can go look at. So, we're in that interesting first part of the century, I guess, where we're moving from analog to true digitization. So, I can't complain. It's an exciting time to be in the industry. So thanks so much, Michael and Sayeh. We do have some questions from the audience, so I'll hand back to Kelsey to chat about those.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we had that came in asked, how can teams ensure communication is consistent without overwhelming stakeholders with too much information? So Sayeh or Michael, whichever would like to discuss this first.
I can take a stab at it.
Yeah, I can help.
Go ahead, Sayeh.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No worries.
All right, I'll do mine really quick. Our public engagement at the city, it's pretty prescribed based on other projects where we have different versions. So there's the inform, engage, collaborate, and depending on which level to degree to which we're going to interact with the stakeholder, we'll initiate one of those protocols. And you're absolutely correct. You can have an overload with the public where you have too many questions, too many touch points. And I would also share in Boulder, we do not consider our touch points with the public to be surveys because they're not statistically significant. They are questionnaires. So we will send a lot of questionnaires out, but we want to be careful to my earlier point, like we don't want to oversaturate someone. So we'll try to collaborate among projects when we're touching the public. Say like, hey, this is a project also going on too.
Perfect. And Sayeh, did you want to add any?
Yeah, absolutely. I add to what what my colleague Mike said. Also, that was correct. So you have to see like who is your the audience or the stakeholders and what matters to just be discussed with them. We don't need to open up every aspects of the projects with them. What does that entertain to that group specifically? You can just bring all the expert folks. You can just have the lesson learned from the old projects to see how you can discuss it with the different the pertinent folks that were involved in different aspects of the project to see what exactly pertains to each group or entity or municipality, and then try to just digest those information before you just bring that up to the public or face it with other municipalities, because you don't want to open up yourself first with opening up those the channels providing the information. The information needs to go through the proper channel, digest properly first, and then go through the proper channel. That's my suggestion.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great insight, and definitely can navigate ways of overbearing the stakeholders. Michael, this is a question for you. Earlier on, you mentioned that there was a specific tool that you use to document your processes. Do you remember what that tool is?
Oh, in terms of design decisions, it's just a spreadsheet, the day, what the decision was, and if there's anything relevant, like a plan or something that goes with it. It's nothing more complicated than a spreadsheet. But yeah, a design decision log. And I've seen it, before it was paper or it's just a Word document, right? So we're getting at least to the point where we're associating, why was this decision made? And getting a little bit more sophisticated with that, but that's about it.
Perfect. And then we have a few other questions. So our next one will be, how do you prepare for a public meeting when you don't know who will be in attendance? So navigating sensitive topics or language barriers. How do you plan and prepare for that meeting? And then this can be for Michael or Sayeh.
I can take a stab at it because we're a public agency, right? We need to make sure if we're inviting the public to a meeting, if there's a language issue, if there's if someone that isn't, their native tongue isn't available, we make it available either through a telephone translator, or we do have full-on presentations that are bilingual now. I'd say when we don't know who's coming, I would always put in construction schedule subject to contractor availability and favorable weather, because I cannot reiterate enough that those two things are so simple, but by putting those statements in, you're kind of caveating, hey, this is when we intend to construct, but those two things are always a factor. And I'm sure anyone could understand that. Even when it goes to the grocery store, buy something, oh no, they don't have it today. Well, that's the same thing with construction equipment. So sometimes I would say I'd put that in. If you don't know, cover yourself by sharing about these are kind of things that impact the schedule of the project. And maybe also, if you don't know the answer to the question, don't be afraid to say, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to get back to you, and then actually do get back with the person. So those are the keys when you don't know the people or what you're going to anticipate, because people will float a lot of stuff at a public meeting, and that's okay. I mean, it's a public meeting. They're supposed to share what their opinions about the project, but those things kind of help on our agency projects.
Yeah, I agree with like what Mike just mentioned about there is a public, if there's a public meeting, there are so many questions that you may not be prepared for it, but just make sure what you have is just fully digest and ready to just speak out for it. You may or may not, depending on the nature of the meeting, you may want to just bring couple of the folks to just be with you for additional information if you feel that. Otherwise, as what Mike said, if you don't know the answer to the question, we don't necessarily need to just provide the answer right now. You can say we can just work on it with the pertinent group within our department or the agency, and we'll follow back with you. So after you just discuss it internally, you can get back to them. So necessarily, just like we don't need to get the answers to all the questions, but make sure that what you just bring it up is you have consider all the aspects of what you're saying. And prepare all those resources as a backup document to provide if in case that there was a questions raised from what you're mentioning in the meeting, so you have the backup documents to provide that as a supporting data.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. And that was our last audience question. And I want to thank you, Michael and Sayeh, for this amazing discussion. We all know how important it is to empower your workforce. And one way to do that is through fostering the collaboration. So thank you again, your insight on this topic. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar series.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.